In the words of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, L'kol zeman, ve'lecho chefetz tachat hashamayim, et laledet ve'et lamut, et latat ve'et lakornatua. Most of us are familiar more with the English. There comes a time for every experience under heaven, a time for being born and a time for dying, a time for tearing down and a time for building up. There's a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering them up and placing them on the stone, a time for embracing, a time for refraining, a time for keeping and a time for giving away, a time for ripping and a time for sewing up, a time for silence and a time for speaking. We're here, of course, to lovingly offer our support to the family and also offer support to each other for the loss of our beloved Dr. Sam Silver. It still feels unreal to me, given where Sam was just but a few weeks ago. And here we are, such an incredible person who left this world on his own terms. Our deepest condolences to Nancy, of course, to Brother John, of course, to Aaron and to Emily, and through marriage to Megan, Joshua, and Orly, and beloved grandchildren Isaac and Ryan, and to all of us here just looking around, seeing just such dear, dear friends and colleagues of Sam's. Kohelet says there's a time for laughing under the chuppah and with one's friends, and there's a time for wailing, and that time has come here. There's a time for silence, which is a time of the long journey of grief, and silence is coming and going, and there's time for speaking, and that's this moment that we are at. Sometimes we have to make ourselves speak at Shiva or here because that's the way we honor. We make ourselves say words, and when we say those words of honor, they circulate in this world like the very air we breathe, and they continue to sustain it in life. And there's a time for ripping, as the ribbon has just been ripped, as hearts have just been torn. And there's time for slowly and at times stitching them up in the journey of life that continues. It's my honor to introduce those speaking at this moment and at this time. We're going to begin with Sam's close friend, Dr. Ted Lawrence. We'll continue with Brother John Silver, and then with Emily and Aaron, and finally Rabbi Doberson. I invite John up at this time. I invite Ted up at this time.
I met Sam 50 years ago, 50 years ago, when I joined the new Cornell Rockefeller MD PhD program, along with Ron Koenig, who I see here today. This was a new idea. Sam and Ron were in the first year of the program. I was year 3. This was a select group of students who cared deeply about biomedical science. Although we all worked in separate laboratories, we came together for a seminar series of eminent visiting professors who would meet with us after their talks. It was our job to ask an intelligent question. And I was terrified that I would ask the dumb question that would embarrass me. But in any case, my first memories of Sam were in admiration for the thoughtful questions he always seemed to ask. We went our separate ways through residencies and fellowships until 1987, when my wife Wendy and I started our faculty life here in Ann Arbor. Early in that first year, we went to a concert in Rackham Auditorium. I turn around, and whom do I see but Sam and this woman we didn't recognize. Turns out, of course, to be Nancy. and we have been the closest friends since then. With our families on the coast, we became each other's family. I'm honored to get to talk about Sam today. Sam touched so many people in so many different ways. Just his career at Michigan has many aspects, and I will hit just the highlights. He started our bone marrow transplant program. In that era, it meant harvesting cells directly from the bone marrow, involving many bone marrow biopsies, so it was technically complex and physically taxing. He was a world expert in a rare but important blood disease called porphyria. This is a stealthy disease with many unusual manifestations, and he was constantly helping other physicians, both diagnosing it for the patients who had it and undiagnosing it for the patients who didn't have it. He was an assistant dean, playing a key role in supporting clinical research. That's just what he did within the institution, and there was more. But on the statewide level, Sam ran one of our first Blue Cross Blue Shield statewide initiatives in developing guidelines for treating breast cancer. And he was what I would call a permanent member of the board of the Michigan Society of Hematology and Oncology. I'll return to that in just a moment. Nationally, he played a huge role in the American Society of Hematology, serving multiple roles, both academic and related to reimbursement. And he was chair of the board of the National Cancer Network, which sets guidelines for cancer treatment across the entire United States. Very few physicians have this breadth of accomplishments, and he received many awards recognizing these contributions. But all these accomplishments, while impressive, don't describe his most important qualities. Sam was known for his wisdom. I got to see Sam in action when we were on the board of the Michigan Society of Hematology and Oncology together. I was on the board just because he recommended me. I didn't otherwise deserve it. An issue would be raised and there would be some discussion. Finally, Sam would be asked to comment and he would settle it. Do any of you remember those old E.F. Hutton commercials? When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen? He was the final word on more issues than I can recall. Sam had this amazing ability to listen and then to ask the right question, and usually to get the person to come up with their own right answer. Always kind, always modest. He reminded me of a quote about two brilliant British prime ministers, Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone, who hated each other, by the way. It's a very interesting story we could talk about another time. It was said that when Gladstone spoke to you, he made you feel he was the smartest person in the room. But when Disraeli spoke to you, and I would say when Sam spoke to you, he made you feel that you were the smartest person in the room. Sam was 100% mensch. Okay, I've held it together so far. I'll keep trying. But now I want to talk about what is most important. Sam loved his family. Nancy, who's been so devoted to him, was captain of the ship outside of work. No question about it. But Sam was the willing passenger. He may never have achieved world ranking in golf or in bridge, but he did enjoy them as long as he was with her. We celebrated many holidays together. I will always remember the seders that we had. We always look forward to hearing Sam talk about how, as a child, he'd help prepare the house for Pesach by the tradition of sweeping up the bread, the chametz, with a flashlight and a feather. And this was chametz that his father had pre-placed in various parts of the house. And he loved singing Pesach songs. What Sam lacked in pitch, he more than made up for in spirit. Sam loved good wine and good food. Nancy watched his diet like a hawk. But my wife, Wendy, got to stretch the rules a bit when we had them to dinner. And Sam really enjoyed that too. These last few years have been difficult, but we're sweetened by long weekend trips to Chicago to see Emmy, Josh, and the boys. And Sam was even able to travel to Connecticut 3 times recently to see Aaron and Megan's new house and many family members at happy events. It's a blessing he was able to do this before his final illness. I've tried today to talk about Sam, not his illness. He was first diagnosed in the early 90s when he broke his arm reaching for something. Shortly after that, right around Rosh Hashanah, we had dinner at our house He had his arm in a sling, and he told us that the x-ray showed a mass. 99 times out of 100, that means an untreatable or poorly treatable cancer. But it turned out to be lymphoma that with treatment gave us 30 years more with this wonderful man. And I can honestly say that every time we were together with Sam and Nancy, we celebrated the very fact of being alive. He tolerated the inconveniences and the side effects of treatment with amazing patience and equanimity. Sam was so much more than his illness, living a full and rich life with the support of an adoring family and many friends. It's a miracle he lived so long, but at the same time, he died far too soon for those of us who loved him so much. May his memory be for a blessing.
Just take a breath, look around, the reason we're here. I'm John, Sandy's younger brother. I know most of you call him Sam, but to our nuclear family, he was always Sandy. And of course, he and our father used to call me Joe, but fortunately that stopped a long time ago. Most of you know Sandy as a friend, a colleague, an amazing physician. But I'm going to recall Sandy as only a younger brother can by 3 years. We moved around a lot when we were growing up. We were born in Paterson, New Jersey, where my mother had a large extended family. And we first lived in East Paterson. And they changed the name from East Paterson to Elmwood Park because they didn't want to be associated with Paterson anymore. And I remember when we were growing up, we would wrestle. He was larger. I would get hurt. Right? Those are the early memories. We moved to Dallas in 1961 when Sandy was 11 and I was 8. And there's a classic picture of him with a guitar and a cowboy hat. And in Texas, Sandy was subjected to learning the Pledge of Allegiance to the Texas flag, the state song, Texas, Our Texas, and he had to study this book by Pennybacker about the history of Texas. And I think this may have left permanent scars. On the other hand, I had a teacher named Candy Kane, and I was in class with Mickey Mantle Jr. In February 1963, we moved to Highland Park, Illinois. Sandy was almost 13. And interestingly, he had his bar mitzvah 3 months later, but back in New Jersey. And the bar mitzvah was on a Sunday, on a Rosh Chodesh. And all the men were wearing tefillin, to my mother's shock, because she didn't know what was going on. And I remember him practicing his Torah portion over and over again. And I actually ended up knowing his Torah portion, at least the several lines, better than I ever learned my own Torah portion. And I'm going to refrain from doing that. I actually can chant, I think, the first 2 or 3 lines of his Torah portion. And I'm sure this is an actual memory, that Sandy refused vehemently to go to Hebrew school. It could be in Dallas, it could be in Illinois, I think Dallas. But amazingly, my parents let him get away with this. I remember him closing himself in his room and refusing to go to Hebrew school. So he didn't always go along with things. And those of you who have ever heard Sandy chant any prayers or be in a Seder, you may notice that his pronunciation of Hebrew is Ashkenazic. It's not Sephardic. And I'm sure this is a consequence of only hearing our father and our grandfather, who was a part-time cantor, on Friday nights, on Seders, being with them in synagogue, because he never finished Hebrew school. In Illinois, it was clear that Sandy was the smarter brother. When I would eventually have the same teacher as he did in high school, I was the younger Silver. with a very high academic bar. And I knew it was a comparison that I would never win. He clearly was the smarter Silver. But that actually freed me from that inner drive for perfection. My mother had a saying, as long as you did the best you could when we took tests. I took that as liberating. Okay, I think I did the best I could, I'm fine. But a couple of years ago, I mentioned this in my interpretation to Sandy, and he said, no, he took it entirely differently. Doing the best you could, he said, I never did the best I could. I always could have done better. He also had the curse of being very tall at a young age, but having absolutely no athletic ability. Jim and our gym teacher, Mr. Stapp, was torture. And although I was definitely not athletic, in the slow heat, I came in last. For those of you who used to play softball, I was chosen to play short right field because I was so bad, right? Even with that, I was the better athlete. It was really a very low bar. And then he went off to Brandeis, and that made my decision to go to Duke instead of Brandeis easier. I have to admit that I did notice that he was summa cum laude and he got Phi Beta Kappa in his junior year, but I unsuccessfully tried to meet those, and I got Phi Beta Kappa my senior year, but it wasn't up to Sandy's standards. And ironically, he went to a Jewish school, and he started to eat treif. And I went to a Methodist school, and I never have. And then he started the Cornell Rockefeller MD PhD program during the summer of 1972, and I worked in the lab during that summer. And on August 17th of that year, our father died, at the age of 46, from colon cancer. And while he was at Cornell and I was at Einstein, during that last year, we actually graduated from medical school in the same year. I caught up because he had to do his PhD in the meantime. But we had a wonderful year living together in Cornell housing. And during that time, I started dating Orly, and actually I proposed to Orly. You know these pre-planned engagements that people have? Actually, I just proposed in Cornell housing. And I would see Sandy occasionally during family events, or when they came to New Jersey, and then at least once a year, he would come to our house in Connecticut for the last 15 years or so and see all of our friends. And years later, when he was in Michigan, I joined him on one of his golf trips to Treetops. I don't know how many of you were on the golf trips. And I was planning to arrange a golf outing at a place like Pebble Beach for his 70th birthday in May 2020. But first there was COVID, and then he had a recurrence, and we never did that. And we spoke of his work, his travels to conferences and testifying to Congress, and how he'd have another month of being the attending on the acute leukemic service. And I would say, aren't you getting too senior for this? But he would do it anyway. But after COVID, not being able to see patients in person was clearly frustrating. And Sandy loved listening to music, but aside from a brief stint on the guitar and an even briefer stint playing the clarinet, thank God, he never played any other instrument, so that was another avenue that was open to me. But he loved to sing at family seders, and we had wonderful family seders where we could sing all the songs, including, and Ted may confirm this, we have this dirge-like, mournful Chad Gadya that no one else knows that we would sing in two-part harmony. It was wonderful. One of the few benefits of the pandemic is actually we got to be on a virtual Seder together for the first time in years, although on Zoom you can't sing together. So, I'm sure you've seen that Sandy kept his emotions inside. He was very cerebral, not emotive, but cared deeply about his family and his patients. He never had a problem saying he had a good time or enjoyed things and appreciated every day, especially after his diagnosis, but he held in a lot. So the Sam you knew was a different version from the Sandy that I grew up with in some ways. From his ability to speak in public, especially at family events. There may be a couple of people here who remember his toast at Orly and my wedding. It's a 5-word toast to John and Orly L'chaim. That was the wedding toast. I know brief is good, but... And then at Aaron's bar mitzvah and Emily's bat mitzvah and their weddings, he just spoke with no notes from the heart. From avoiding all athletic activity, he learned to play and love golf. From hating to play games when we grew up, he would have to be the master of ceremonies for board games like Monopoly and Clue because he didn't want to participate. And then he learned to play and love bridge. And thank you, Nancy. The last day I saw Sandy was Tuesday, which was Tisha B'Av, traditionally the lowest day of the Jewish year, marking the destruction of both temples. And what we believe is most central to our lives was destroyed. But the last line of what we read on that day from the book of Lamentations is one of hope, that we need to face our brokenness to become whole. So turn us back to you and we will turn, renew our days as before. This is what we say when we return the Torah to the Ark. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva chadesh yamenim k'kedem. We always want more time. In the Torah reading yesterday, even Moshe asked God for more time so he could go to the Promised Land. A friend of mine, Rabbi Phyllis Berman, told me after hearing of Sandy's death, he was relieved of a body that was no longer serving him easily, and we are left to mourn and to honor his memory. Thank you.
I had 35 years of cherished memories with my dad, and over those last several days, there are a few things that I kept thinking about. The first and most important was seeing my dad become Saba Sam. I didn't realize how much joy it would bring me, but seeing him with my children over the past 3 years was truly magical. Isaac and Ryan loved him so much. Whenever he walked into our house or they saw him over FaceTime, the boys would instantly have smiles on their faces, and so did my dad. He taught the boys how to properly use a stethoscope, which Ryan is very fond of. He loved reading to them and talked to them about all types of interesting animals. We would have Saba Sam sing-along time where he would sing songs and jingles from his childhood. I always thought that his songs were made up, questioning him if those songs were in fact real. He will Google the song, play the clip, and prove me wrong. We will keep your memory alive every day for Isaac and Ryan. We will sing those silly songs. We will talk about Dr. Saba with whatever plastic medical equipment we have, and we will remember all of the wonderful moments we had with you. Now, I want to paint a picture of the last visit I had with my parents in Chicago, which was at the beginning of June. We had a tradition that the day the kids were in school, my mom, dad, and I would treat ourselves to a fancy and fabulous lunch. This particular trip, we were celebrating an early Father's Day and thought it'd be fitting to go back to one of my dad's favorite Chicago restaurants, Ralph Lauren. We were lucky that day as my husband, Josh, was able to slip away from work and join us. I remember it clearly. I sat next to my dad, who ordered the steak frite special and sipped on a classic cocktail. He struck up a conversation with our waiter, talking about who knows what, which was so typical of my dad, always wanting to connect with the people around him, whether he knew them on a personal level or not. You could tell that he was extremely completely in his element in that moment. He was happy, he was relaxed, he was surrounded by family, the people he loved, eating a delicious meal in a beautiful restaurant. It was the perfect meal and the perfect way to celebrate him. Dad, thank you for loving me. Thank you for being there for me and supporting me. Thank you for being patient and so incredibly kind. Thank you for embracing the fact that I attended University of Michigan's rival school, Michigan State. And thank you for devoting your life to medicine and helping so many people. You made a difference in this world, and you will always be so loved.
I really shouldn't have needed any help to put together words honoring Dad. As you have already heard, and as you of course knew even before that, he was an incredible man. This eulogy could write itself. Even so, I did go Googling for tips on writing a Jewish eulogy. One I saw caught my attention, and it was this. Not only should you avoid talking about the deceased's negative attributes, so we'll leave those out. You should err on the side of being generous in listing their positive ones. The reason being the natural tendency for their humility to make them appear less accomplished or kind or caring, etc., than they really were. By intentionally being generous in the eulogy, we cancel that out and end up at the correct level of praise. Dad certainly was humble, and at the risk of mentioning a negative trait, maybe even self-deprecating almost to a fault. That being the case, he must have been much better than we all think. But how can that be? We know that he was an amazing person, kind and gentle, intelligent and incisive, thoughtful and wise, hardworking and devoted. How can we possibly hold him in any higher esteem than we already do? There were so many different roles he played, and he excelled in all of them. Sam, Dr. Silver, Sandy, Sammy, Dad, Saba Sam. Friend, colleague, patient, clinician, administrator, scientist, researcher, author, editor, committee member, brother, loving husband, adoring and adored father and grandfather, and many others. Well, I can't begin to count the number of times someone said to me upon realizing that I was his son, I work with him on such and such committee. What an incredible, kind, smart man he is. And even though I agreed with all of the adjectives they were using to describe him, agreed with everything they were saying, hearing someone that I had never met talk about him in such glowing terms was always a bit odd. Like what you would expect if your dad was a celebrity. He was, of course, not a celebrity. Humility and a love for things that the general public couldn't care less about, much less understand, saw to that. But nevertheless, these kind words of strangers underscore in hindsight for me how rich and multifaceted his life was and how many lives he touched. But even though he touched the lives of so many, I never felt like he wasn't there for me. The last afternoon I spent with him was while he was still in the hospital. The first 2.5 days I was here visiting him, he mostly slept. But that last afternoon, he was awake and coherent and wondering what his platelet count was and when his next PET scan would be, a true hematologist till the end. I talked with him both about the road ahead, which we knew was going to be tough, and about what his wishes were. Later, he expressed surprise to me that so many of his friends were visiting him and spending so much time with him. I told him that was no surprise to me because his friends loved him dearly. Then he told me he was surprised that Emily and I had come to visit. I knew from the comment about his friends that he wasn't thinking 100% clearly, but this second comment still took me aback. When I asked why, he said that he was worried that he hadn't spent enough time with us, that he had spent too much time at work, that he hadn't been a good father. I told him that we loved him and that I never felt like he wasn't there when I needed him, that I never felt unsupported by him, which was the truth. After all, how many high school tennis matches do you really need to go to? When you've seen me lose to Pioneer once, you've seen me lose to them 11 times, but who's counting? I believe Dad took great comfort in hearing this. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe he could have worked a little bit less, not for his loved one's sake, but to have had more time for himself, which he deserved. But ultimately, he loved what he did, loved his life, and loved those closest to him. And we certainly loved him. I really don't think you can ask for more than that. Dad lived a full life. Though he died at an age earlier than we expect for a relatively clean-living person, too soon certainly, we should all be grateful to have had the time with him that we did. Wearing his tallis clips, which had been his father Eliu's, here in shul yesterday, reminded me that Eliu passed away from cancer when Dad was only 22. And unlike his father, Dad was able to meet and spend time with his grandchildren, who gave him so much joy. Yes, Dad had multiple battles with cancer and struggled against it for years, but he was able to live his life up until the end, visiting Chicago and Connecticut, seeing friends and going out to restaurants, doing consulting work, keeping in touch with colleagues across the country. A very full life indeed. Dad grew up in a relatively observant family, though. After leaving home to go to college at Brandeis, somewhat ironically, his observance declined. In his adult life, he was not a frequent synagogue goer, but I know, like me, also a non-frequent synagogue goer, he did find comfort in the familiarity of religious ritual. And some of my most cherished memories with him are of attending Mincha and Neilah services with him. But even more than providing the comfort of ritual, Judaism gave him an outlet for introspection and affirmation of his sense of purpose, when later in life he found reasons for questioning. When his longtime patients began succumbing to their illnesses, and when eventually his own illness returned. Please celebrate his life, keep his positive traits in mind, and know that he was better even than you thought. Remember the kindness and support he gave you. Remember how sweet he was, how bright he was, how much good he did in so many ways. We'll remember him when he isn't there to call for the free hematology consult we used to get while driving home from work. And every morning when we put on the same Ban roll-on deodorant that he always used. And when we're out at a restaurant and we see something on the menu that he would definitely have ordered, the date pudding we saw a couple days ago. We'll remember how much he means to us when we open the door for Mom the first time she comes to see the new house in the suburbs. He's not there. We'll remember how he made our lives whole when, after cleaning up dinner, we go upstairs to our room, get in bed, turn on the TV to watch a show, and see that our soulmate is no longer next to us. We'll remember him constantly. May his memory be a blessing to us all.
From Psalm 15. Mizmor LeDavid Adonai mi yagor b'olecha mi yishkon b'har kodshecha. Holech tamim ufot tzedek v'dover emet v'ilvavo. Lo ragala l'shono lo yasal re'ehu ra v'cherpala nasal kravo. Ose ele lo yimot lo'olam. O Lord, who shall dwell in your sanctuary and abide upon your holy mountain? The one who lives with integrity, does what is right, speaks the truth in the heart, with no slander upon his tongue, who does no evil to anyone. Whoever lives this way, their memory will stand firm forever. I want to thank those who spoke for such beautiful and heartfelt words. Nancy, our deepest condolences to you. I know this is a sad time, but I pray that through the darkness you'll be comforted by the light and warmth of the memories of the years you and Sam spent together. Your love and commitment to each other was evident to all. And we'll all be with you in the months and years ahead. To Aaron and to Emily and to Megan and Josh, may the memory of your father and father-in-law's love for you and deep, deep pride in all that you did and all that you do be always with you. To Jonathan and to Orly, as you remember your beloved brother and brother-in-law, I hope you'll find comfort in the days ahead. And may the many good memories, including those we heard, and I'm sure so many more, continue to light your way. I know that Isaac and Ryan aren't right here at this moment, but they will always be in Saba Sam's heart. I hope they have strong memories of him as they grow. We know they're going to hear stories, they're going to hear songs about his love for them. And I hope that you'll always, as I'm sure you will, show them the pictures, show them the videos, and that will help them to always remember him. To Ben and Marissa, to Elliot and Rebecca, Leah and Adam, and to cousins Julie and Paul, to all the families and friends and colleagues, may Sam's memory always be with you for an inspiration. Yesterday in the Torah portion, in addition to reading the Ten Commandments and the Shema, we read a beautiful line, which is so remarkable. It jumps out at me every time I read it, especially when you view it from the perspective of the commentaries of the rabbis. After one of the many reminders in the book of Deuteronomy of how important it is to observe the commandments, we read, V'yasita hayashar v'hatov b'nei Adonai. Do the right and the good in the eyes of God. The rabbis taught that this isn't just a way of saying that by observing the commandments we do what's right in God's eyes. They said two things about it. They expanded it in two ways. First of all, they said, the Torah can't say everything you have to do. So whatever it is you do in life that isn't mentioned in the Torah, do it right and do it good. Do it well. And secondly, they taught that this was the source for what's known as the tradition of lifnim mishurat hadin, going beyond, beyond the letter of the law. Not just doing what you're required to do, but going the extra mile, taking on an extra obligation, doing it with more passion and with more sincerity than you are required to do. Not just check off a box and say we did what we had to do, but to take the step of going the extra mile. So to find the good and right path in all things and to go the extra mile for others. I think those commentaries could have been written with Sam in mind. For today, we're remembering a man who embodied those principles. Every person in this room, every person that came in contact with him, knows that Sam Silver just exuded sweetness and kindness, sincerity and humility, and an absolute dedication to family, to friends, to colleagues, and to patients. Every one of us, I'm sure, can close our eyes and picture that wonderful smile, hear that soft-spoken manner, the way in which Sam so sincerely listened to you. And I really appreciated so much of what was said, but I really resonated with that thing of making you feel like you were the smartest person in the room. He would listen to you, and you would feel like he was understanding what you were saying and that you were teaching him something. And that was so beautiful and so meaningful. His understated, humble manner was always so refreshing and so engaging. And I so much enjoyed and learned from our talks together. I know how deeply Sam loved our Jewish tradition. He often told me the stories of him in the synagogue with his father growing up. And over the last few years, he joined in our Talmud study group with enthusiasm for the debates and discussions in the sacred text. He found great meaning in them. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, Nancy, you were able to log into the class for a few minutes, and he was able to have that what turned out to be that one last opportunity to learn with the group. He was a joy to talk with, to learn from, and that was obvious in his professional life. He was so kind to his patients, so engaged in their care, and easily earned their trust. And with his colleagues, I know he always went the extra mile. I was told the other day when we were talking that Sam took great interest in promoting other people's careers, in helping other people achieve more than perhaps they thought they could. I was told that he loved to write recommendations for people. I'm telling you, many of us have to do that, and we do it willingly for friends and for colleagues, but apparently he was really passionate about doing it, even right up to the last weeks of his life. He loved to help people achieve more. He loved to make contacts for people. He loved to talk to people behind the scenes to help others, to go that extra mile. And he loved to mentor, and people would listen to him, and he listened to them to know what they needed. He was always supportive of others, including people perhaps that he didn't meet. I understand that he was involved in issues of medical policy as well, thinking about the cost of medicines for patients he would never see, and so many other issues. So supportive. And that support also, as we heard, applied to his children as well. Aaron and Emily told me how supportive their dad was whenever they needed him, and how he again went beyond what was expected to show his connection with them. I'm going to tell you a story that they told me the other day that I found absolutely fascinating. Aaron and Emily told me that Sam, the dad, would read the newspapers from the towns, the cities that they lived in Utah or in Connecticut or in the Chicago area, and tell them what was going on in their community so that they would be prepared for it. Because who has time to read the newspaper? He didn't have time either, but he did it. That's just amazing. And just shows the connection that they built with him. And the trips to Connecticut and Chicago, even up to the beginning of this summer. He and Nancy would visit so often, and those visits brought such sincere joy. He was so proud of your accomplishments. And I know especially proud of Isaac and Ryan. And he would tell me, I can't come to the Talmud class, we're going to see the boys. And I knew which boys he was talking about always. But that was something that brought such pleasure, to go to see the new home, to see the family, and to be part of that. And Nancy, I know you and Sam love to travel in Michigan. We talked about that, but there were opportunities beyond that to medical conferences in many different places where you and Sam had the opportunity to celebrate his interest in good food and wine, and also the times you were able to spend together on the golf course right here in Ann Arbor, which probably meant as much or more. Such wonderful marriage over 42 years. So many memories and so many good times. And with everything, there was the sense of right and good, which the Torah talked about, and going beyond expectations. And some of that was reflected as well in Sam's determination to fight the illness that he faced, to continue to seek out new treatments, to rise above setbacks. Countless number of times, I'm sure, where I called him to see how he was, and he would say, well, I'm trying this new treatment, or I'm trying this and it's working, or it's been a little bit difficult, but I could see he was grabbing for every day that he could get. And did that for so many years. But then there came the time when he knew there was nothing more that could be done. And with the blessing of his family, he realized the fight was over. Those of us who saw him in the last days knows that he was so sad that the end of his life on this earth was near, but he was at peace. And he earned that peace through all of his actions. So his sincere concern, love, and support for all around him that was returned to him as he faced those last days. So the family and the dear friends, I want you, obviously, to remember Sam Silver. And let us keep him as our tradition teaches in the bond of life by doing more than remembering him, but by emulating the qualities we remember. We should all smile a little bit more, listen a little bit better, talk a little more softly, and try a little harder to go beyond what's expected of us. And embrace the opportunity to do the right and the good for everyone we encounter. In that way, his memory will truly be for a blessing. I'll ask you to please rise for the memorial prayer. Diel Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Ashchina, B'malot Kedoshim Utorim Kezorakia, Mazirim Mit Nishmat, Shmuel Yechezkel Ben Eliyahu Avigdor V'chana Shalach Liolamo. Began Eden Te Menuchato, and Abal Rachamim Astereu Beseter Knafecha Liolamim. Utzor B'tzorachem Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato. V'yanuach b'shalom amishkavo v'nomar. Amen. O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of Shmuel Yechezkel Ben Eliyahu Avigdor V'chana, who has returned to his eternal home. O God, remember and help us to always remember the deeds that he performed here in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life through our memories, through our storytelling, through our love. The Lord is his portion. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, there will be no formal procession to the cemetery. We would ask that as the casket leaves the chapel today, those of you going to the cemetery for the interment service with the family, we would ask that you go directly to your cars so we can get everybody to the cemetery in a timely manner. Those of you not going to the cemetery, if you'll just go directly to your cars anyway, and for the chance you may be blocking somebody. I'm going to ask for the pallbearers to step up in just a moment.